My ex used me to raise her son, while cheating behind my back, so I walked away, silently, and now she's desperate for the life she threw away. I've always believed love means loyalty, no matter how hard things get. Maybe it's because I grew up watching my parents stick together through things that would have broken most people. Debt, illness, everything. I carried that belief into adulthood like a compass. So when I met Megan, I thought I'd finally found someone who understood what love really meant. She was a single mom, 29, working in the same department as me. I remember the first time I saw her, balancing a phone on her shoulder, typing like her life depended on it, and still managing to smile at everyone who walked by. There was something magnetic about her. Not just beauty, but this aura of resilience. She told me she had a 4-year-old son named Ethan, and when she talked about him, her whole face softened. We started small. Lunch breaks, late texts about life, small jokes that turned into inside jokes. She once said, "I don't know how I'm holding it all together," and I told her, "You don't have to do it alone." That line changed everything. Soon, I was fixing leaky faucets in her apartment, picking up groceries after work, and reading bedtime stories to Ethan. He'd sit on my shoulders, giggling as I called him Captain. I didn't mind the extra effort. It made me feel like I belonged somewhere. Megan called me her anchor. I believed her. At night, when she fell asleep on the couch after long days, I'd look at her and think, this is it. This is what love is supposed to feel like. Quiet, steady, real. But sometimes I'd catch a flicker in her eyes, something unreadable, a distance. I brushed it off as exhaustion. After all, love is about understanding, right? I had no idea that understanding would soon become my biggest mistake. Before I knew it, weekends at Megan's place turned into living there full-time. It wasn't some grand decision, more like one small act of kindness after another that slowly turned permanent. Ethan would run to the door yelling, "Dad's home!" every evening, and my heart would swell every single time. I wasn't his real father, but in those moments it didn't matter. I'd tuck him in, read Goodnight Moon, and he'd fall asleep clutching my hand. I thought, maybe this is what family feels like. Megan told her friends I was the man who saved us. She'd post pictures online, Ethan on my shoulders, the three of us at the park, with captions like, "My boys." I won't lie, I loved it. For the first time in my life, I felt needed, appreciated, anchored. But over time, little things began to change. The gratitude in her tone started fading. Where she used to say, "Thank you for helping," she now said, "You forgot to grab milk again?" Her hugs got shorter. The I love yous came out more like habits than feelings. Still, I brushed it off. Relationships settle, right? That's what I told myself. Besides, I didn't want Ethan to feel instability again. That kid had already seen enough disappointment. I kept showing up. School events, parent-teacher meetings, late-night fevers. Megan would text, "Can you handle bedtime? I'm exhausted." Of course I did, every time. Because that's what love is, right? Picking up the slack when your partner's tired, but sometimes, late at night, I'd catch her scrolling through her phone, smiling at something she wouldn't show me. When I'd ask, she'd say, "It's just work stuff, don't be weird." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Because the alternative, that something was off, felt too heavy to face. It started with the small things. The kind of changes you only notice when you love someone too much to admit what's happening. Megan began staying out later. At first, it was harmless. Girls' night, extra shifts. Traffic was insane. I believed every excuse because that's what trust is, right? Giving someone the benefit of the doubt even when your gut whispers something else. Her perfume changed. No longer the soft vanilla she used to wear, but something sharper, expensive. She started dressing up more even when she claimed she was just meeting coworkers. And when I asked how her night went, her answers got shorter. Fine. Tiring. You wouldn't get it. One night I tried to cook her favorite pasta, the one she said reminded her of our first date. I lit candles, even bought a small gift for Ethan. She came home 2 hours late. No apology. Just an eye roll. "You didn't have to do all this," she muttered, walking past the table. The pasta was cold by the time I ate alone. The next morning, she accused me of being too clingy, said I was making her feel trapped. That hit me like a slap. Trapped? I'd been working overtime to keep our lives running. Rent, daycare, groceries, everything. She used to thank me for being dependable. Now it felt like a crime. But what hurt most wasn't the coldness. It was the silence, the emotional distance, the way she'd sit beside me on the couch but scroll through her phone like I didn't exist. I told myself she was just stressed, that single mothers have good days and bad ones. I wanted to believe this was just a rough patch, a phase we'd outgrow, but somewhere deep down I could feel it. Something, or someone, had already replaced me. It was a Saturday morning when the first real crack showed. Megan was in the shower and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't look. I'm not that guy. But something inside me twisted when I saw the name Derek. The preview read, "Last night was amazing." My stomach dropped. My first instinct wasn't anger, it was disbelief. I stared at the message like it couldn't possibly be real. When she came out wrapped in a towel, I tried to sound calm. "Who's Derek?" She froze just for a second, then laughed. "He's a coworker. We were at a team dinner, remember? Don't be paranoid." Her tone cut deep, mocking, dismissive. When I pressed, she sighed dramatically. "God, you're always looking for problems. No wonder I feel smothered. I should have walked away right then. But instead, I apologized. Told her I trusted her and didn't mean to make her feel bad. She gave me a half-hearted hug, kissed my cheek, and said, "I knew you'd understand." That night, she was colder than ever. Ethan was the only warmth in that apartment. His laughter the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I helped him build a Lego house on the living room floor, pretending not to hear Megan's phone buzz again and again. Over the next few weeks, her distance became impossible to ignore. She'd dress up for late shifts and come home smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. She'd roll her eyes when I offered to help, accuse me of making everything about myself. The woman who once called me her anchor now treated me like dead weight. One night, as she left again with that same sharp perfume trailing behind her, Ethan looked up at me and asked, "Why is Mommy always gone now?" I didn't have an answer, only a sick, hollow feeling that the home I built was quietly crumbling beneath my feet. A few days later, the truth found me when I wasn't even looking for it. I was at the grocery store standing in line when a familiar voice called out, "Hey, man! How's Megan?" It was Chris, one of her co-workers. I smiled weakly and said, "She's good, just busy." He laughed awkwardly, scratching his neck. "Busy? Yeah, I'll bet. She and Derek practically disappeared at that company retreat last month. Didn't think you'd be cool with that." The world froze. My heart didn't even race, it just stopped. I remember hearing the beep of the scanner, the rustle of grocery bags, but everything sounded distant. I muttered something, paid, and left the cart behind. I sat in my car for 15 minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. When I got home, I checked her work trip photos on social media. She'd posted a few group shots, all smiles, all innocent. But in one reflection, a mirror behind her, Derek's hand was on her waist. My hands trembled as I zoomed in, over and over until there was no denying it. That night, I didn't confront her. I didn't scream or throw anything. Instead, I went quiet. I started taking mental notes. The nights she left, the excuses, the shifts that didn't match her company's schedule. I began saving screenshots, texts, receipts. Megan noticed my silence and mistook it for guilt. She got bolder. Secretive calls, flirty laughter in the next room. I wasn't the clueless boyfriend anymore. I was the man waiting in the dark, watching everything she thought she hid so well. And for the first time in months, I felt something other than heartbreak. I felt clarity. She thought I was weak. She had no idea I was already planning my exit. After that day, something in me shifted. I stopped asking questions. I stopped hoping she'd come home smiling again or that we'd fix things with time. Instead, I started watching, listening, recording the details she thought I was too blind to notice. It wasn't about revenge, Not yet. It was about reclaiming control over a life I'd quietly lost. I created a folder on my phone named Bills. Inside it, I stored screenshots of her messages, her payments, proof that I was the one covering every expense while she played house with someone else. I noted dates, receipts, her supposed overnight shifts that didn't match her work records. Every piece of data became armor for the inevitable moment she'd try to flip the script. At home, I moved like a ghost. I'd still help Ethan with homework, pack his lunches, and make small talk about his day. He was innocent in all of this, a child clinging to routine. Megan barely noticed my silence. If anything, she seemed relieved not to be questioned. She spent more time out, coming home reeking of cheap whiskey and another man's cologne. Sometimes she'd smile at me, not warmly but mockingly, like she'd already decided I'd never leave. "You're too good of a guy," she'd say, patting my shoulder. "You'd never walk out on Ethan." And for a while, she was right. That kid was the only reason I stayed, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized staying didn't help him. All it did was teach him that love means suffering in silence. So, I made a decision. I wouldn't fight. I wouldn't argue. I'd let her dig her own grave. And when she finally fell in, I'd be long gone. It happened on a Friday night, the kind that starts ordinary but ends up carving itself into your memory forever. Megan had told me she was going out with coworkers. Her tone was clipped, impatient, like she was already somewhere else in her head. Ethan and I watched a movie, ordered pizza, and by 10 p.m., he was asleep on the couch beside me. I was cleaning up when her phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't plan to check it, but when I saw Derek's name pop up again, this time with a heart emoji, something inside me broke. The message read, "You free to sneak out again this weekend?" Can't stop thinking about last night. I felt physically sick. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. All those nights I thought she was exhausted from work. She was just with him, using me as her safety net, her babysitter, her provider, while giving someone else everything I thought we shared. A few hours later, she stumbled in, drunk, heels in her hand, laughing. She didn't even notice Ethan asleep on the couch. She picked up the phone I'd placed face up on the table, froze for a second, then slurred, "You shouldn't go through my stuff." I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. The woman I'd loved, the woman who'd let her son call me Dad. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt hollow. She sneered as if daring me to explode. Then, with a bitter laugh, she said, "Come on, don't pretend you didn't know. You're just convenient." That sentence destroyed something sacred in me. I looked at her one last time and whispered, "Not anymore." Then I carried Ethan to bed, kissed his forehead, and sat in the dark alone, realizing I'd hit rock bottom, not because she cheated, but because I'd finally accepted she never loved me at all. The next morning, I woke up feeling like a stranger in my own life. The apartment was silent except for Ethan's soft breathing in the next room. Megan was still asleep, makeup smudged, her phone buzzing on the nightstand with unread messages from Derek. I stood there for a long moment, realizing I didn't owe her a confrontation anymore. She'd already confessed everything through her actions. I made coffee, not out of habit, but as a ritual. One last act of calm before erasing myself from this story. Then I began packing, quietly, methodically. My clothes, my work laptop, a few photos that were mine before her. I left the furniture, the dishes, the TV, everything I'd bought, because none of it mattered anymore. I wasn't going to fight for what was poisoned. Before leaving, I wrote 2 letters. One for Megan and one for Ethan. Hers was short, emotionless. "You won't hear from me again. I wish you the life you were chasing. Take care of your son, Ethan's though. That one took everything out of me. I told him he was brave, kind, and that none of this was his fault. I said I hoped he'd grow up to understand that real love doesn't make you feel small. I ended it with, 'You'll always have my heart, kiddo, even if I'm not there.' When I closed the door behind me, the sound felt final, like the end of a chapter that had been bleeding for too long. I didn't leave out of anger. I left because silence was the loudest statement I could ever make. As I walked down those steps with my bags in hand, the morning sun hit my face, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The days after I left felt eerily quiet, like the world had turned its volume down just for me. I kept waiting for her to call, to text, to rage, but she didn't, not right away. I think she thought I'd come crawling back, tail between my legs like always. But she underestimated the peace that comes after you've been emptied of every emotion. At first, I stayed with a friend across town, just long enough to figure out my next steps. I went to work, kept my head down, and avoided anyone who might mention her name. Then, slowly, the messages started trickling in. First, a simple, "We need to talk." Then a longer one. "You can't just abandon Ethan like that. He misses you." That one hurt the most. Because she was right, I did miss him. Every single day. But I wasn't going back. Not to her. Not to that lie of a home. Then, the tone of her messages changed. Desperation replacing arrogance. She said Derek had moved on, that she was struggling to keep up with rent, that Ethan asks about you every night. I read every word, but I never replied. I'd given her years of my life, my time, my savings, my love, and all she gave back was betrayal. Mutual friends told me she'd been asking around, trying to find out where I'd gone. Apparently, Derek ghosted her completely once the bills started stacking. I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was calm, like justice was taking care of itself. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding. I got promoted at work, reconnected with old friends, started running again. For the first time in years, my apartment didn't feel like a cage. It felt like mine. And while she was unraveling, I was finally becoming whole. It was almost 3 months after I'd left when I saw her again. I came home from work one evening to find Megan standing at my door, holding Ethan by the hand. She looked nothing like the woman I'd once loved. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes red, her confidence gone. Ethan hid behind her leg, clutching a worn-out toy I'd bought him last Christmas. "Please, can we talk?" she said, her voice trembling. I hesitated, but seeing Ethan's face, I couldn't just shut the door. I let them in. She stood there in my living room, scanning the walls, realizing everything about me had moved on. There were no photos of us, no reminders of her, just peace, the kind she'd never understand. She started crying. "He left me, okay? Derek left. I made a mistake. I thought—" her voice cracked. "I thought I could have both. I thought you'd always be there." I didn't say anything. I just watched her unravel. Ethan looked up at me with confused eyes. "Mommy says you don't love us anymore," he whispered. That one hit hard. Not because it was true, but because she'd weaponized his love. Megan stepped closer. "Please, for Ethan, we can fix this. You're the only one who ever cared." Her mascara streaked down her face, her voice breaking with regret. For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. Then I remembered every sleepless night, every lie. Every moment she made me question my worth. I knelt down to Ethan's level. "Hey, buddy, I'll always care about you, okay? Always." He nodded quietly. Then I looked at her. Calm, steady, unflinching. "You didn't lose me, Megan," I said softly. "You threw me away." And as she started to cry again, I opened the door and walked them both out. This time for good. After that day, something inside me finally settled. For months, I'd been carrying invisible weight, resentment, grief, confusion. But watching Megan walk away that last time, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I was done. And that feeling, that quiet, unshakable peace, was something I hadn't known in years. I started focusing on myself again. I got a new apartment, small but full of sunlight. Every morning, I'd make coffee, open the windows, and just breathe. No tension, no pretending, just me. I picked up running again, joined a local gym, even took a solo weekend trip for the first time in forever. I began living, not just existing. At work, people said I looked different, lighter. I started volunteering for extra projects, not to distract myself, but because I wanted to build something that was mine. Slowly, I began reclaiming the version of myself I'd buried trying to save someone who didn't want saving. Sometimes I'd think of Ethan, his laugh, the way he'd run into my arms after school. I missed him terribly, but I knew returning to that toxic home would only teach him the wrong kind of love. Maybe someday he'd understand that leaving was my way of protecting him too. Every night, before I went to sleep, I'd sit on my balcony and watch the city lights. I didn't wish for revenge. I didn't stalk her socials. I just let go. Peace didn't come from forgetting her. It came from remembering who I was before her. And for the first time, I knew. Sometimes the strongest revenge is simply moving on in silence. It had been almost a year since I walked away when I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address, just my name written in a child's handwriting. My heart skipped. I knew that writing. I opened it carefully, hands trembling before I even finished the first line. Dear Dad, Mom said you're not really my dad, but I think she's wrong. You taught me how to ride a bike. You read to me when I was scared. Real dads do that. I miss you. I hope you're happy. Love, Ethan. I sat there for a long time, staring at the page through blurry eyes. Every sentence felt like both a wound and a gift. That little boy, caught in the middle of lies he never asked for, still remembered me as something good, something real. For a moment, I considered reaching out, finding them, trying to rebuild some small connection. But deep down, I knew what reopening that door would mean. I couldn't save her, and I couldn't live in the shadows of that past again. What I could do was honor the love that had been pure, the bond between a man and a child who didn't share blood, only heart. So I wrote back a simple letter. I told Ethan that I was proud of him, that I'd always be cheering for him, even from far away. I told him he'd grow up to be better, stronger, kinder, and wiser than the world around him. When I sealed that envelope, it felt like the real ending, not revenge, not closure from her, but healing. Because in the end, I didn't lose everything. I lost what was false, and I kept what was real, my peace, my self-respect, and the quiet certainty that sometimes walking away is the loudest kind of love there is.